Robert Plank Show, episode 323 Website Planning for Small Businesses. Get a clear roadmap for what you want, manage expectations, and avoid the SEO geek speak with veteran web professional Ben Seigel. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're talking right now with Ben Seigel, and Ben is a veteran web professional, and he oversees projects for a range of U.S. companies and nonprofits from Silicon Valley tech startups to local environmental advocates. And Ben is the author of Website Planning for Small Business, a results-oriented roadmap for designers, business owners, and project managers. And for those of you following along, his website is versastudio.com. If you're the kind of person that likes to sort of have those things open while you're listening, that's VERSASTUDIO. So, Mr. Ben, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So I'm glad to be talking to you today. And so we said a little bit about your bio. And can you tell us in your own words, sort of having seen that and heard that, what makes you stand out compared to everyone else who does this sort of stuff?
Well, the main thing we like to say makes us stand out is our collaborative approach. And that's not to say there's no other firm in the world that does this, but a lot of firms, I think, view websites as kind of a cookie cutter approach where it's kind of like a pizza. What do you want on it? We'll slap this here, we'll slap this there. And you can get a decent website out of that process. But for businesses that need to go deeper, that really need to analyze and understand their market, figure out who they are, who they're trying to reach, and how they're trying to reach them, the collaborative approach is a lot more effective. I'd like to say it aligns with businesses' goals. So we like to start from there. What are your goals as a business? And most folks, but not all, will say more sales. But it's not always sales. Sometimes they want to be more efficient. They want to attract a different type of client. They want to change their image. There are lots of answers to that question. So the way we work is to try to align everything we do with those business goals that they tell us in initial discussions.
And I really like that. And it sounds like that's sort of more of like a holistic approach, because it seems to me that a lot of people, they say, well, I need a website. I don't really know what the reason is or what's that going to get me, but I just don't want to get left behind. And so do you sort of see this sort of thing, like as far as your competitors and people like that, sort of like you said, like people just kind of slap things on there, or it's almost kind of like a commodity with other people?
There's a fair bit of that, and to have some sympathy for everyone involved in these projects. Oftentimes, business owners or decision makers they're just busy. They're overwhelmed. They're overloaded, and they would like to imagine that there's a hands-off process that they can hire someone else to follow that will get them a great result. I, to kind of extend that sympathy metaphor into something we all understand, like something to do with a home. So someone's really busy, but their kitchen is trashed. They need a new kitchen. What they imagine in their head is that they can just call someone and say, I need a new kitchen. I want these cabinets here and this there. Is that enough? And the person will say, sure, we'll take it from here. In reality, building a kitchen requires a lot of decisions, a lot of little things, from the type of floor to the type of cabinets and how durable the countertops need to be and at what height. And you can imagine all the questions that would come up. And if someone's going to do a good job meeting the needs of that homeowner or condo owner, they need to ask a lot of questions and they need to get clear answers before they can just start, as I used to say with my grandpa, making sawdust. So it's the same thing with websites. If you want to get a good result that aligns with the needs of your business as opposed to just a result, you really need to dig in and figure out answers to the hard questions and collaborate. And that's how we like to approach it.
And I can relate to a lot of that in a lot of different areas. Like anytime that I'm like hiring someone to perform a task that I can't really do myself, it's like the ideal situation would be if they could somehow read my mind, and that way they could just deliver exactly what it is that I have, what sort of expectations I sort of have. But, my reading technology isn't here. So then the alternative is to kind of, I guess, like go back and forth, and for them to ask me the right questions and me to provide some answers, and they to sort of come back with some sort of different sort of options. And again, whether it's your kitchen analogy or a website, that makes perfect sense. And so, I mean, how do people sort of avoid the problem, though, of that kind of scope creep of like, well, I don't want it to be completely hands off because I don't want to be disappointed, but I also don't want to have to learn a bunch or have to sort of micromanage every single decision. So how do you sort of reconcile that sort of, not being two of separate minds, but also not having to sort of do tons of work just in that back and forth?
Well, a lot of that comes from the trust between agency and client. And of course, that's built over time. It's hard to have that much trust from the get-go. It's kind of the same as a relationship. But we have a client, for example, that we've worked for I think going on 3 or 4 years now. We've worked on a rebrand. We've redesigned their website, and with a last redesign, it was kind of rushed. So we told them, look, if we come back to you with every decision, every question, this is never going to get done in time. So generally speaking, if it's a major thing, we'll run it by you and we'll ask for a yay or a nay or a just go ahead. And so what we're looking for is yeah, that's the right direction. I trust you to manage the details. But when you start at the beginning with someone, if you can build some of that trust and say, we're going to figure out what your needs are. We're going to explain why certain things matter to you, but we're not going to get you bogged down in the details of technicalities or server setup or any other things that are really our job to worry about. But you have to have some trust in us that will be basically working in your best interest. When you have that, people, the process flows more smoothly. And you could take that back to the home building analogy as well. If someone just says, pick out a floor for me that's durable, that's in this approximate shade, done. Then they trust the contractor to go off and do that and not show them 50 flooring samples because that's too much detail for them.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe at first with some sort of client from both ends, there's maybe a little bit more legwork as far as like making sure that all the details are taken care of. But I really like how you said that. Well, there's like the trust factor, and then there's sort of that mindset of, well, I'm going to explain things to the extent where I'm going to explain like why this matters, but kind of leave the technicalities out that they don't need to know, and if possible, kind of make a question in a yes, no, or go ahead sort of thing. That way there's not a lot of places to get stuck. And you mentioned there that they had that client where you did like a redesign and a rebrand. So I'm curious, like if people are kind of looking to go to you for a website and things like that, do you specialize in certain things? Like if someone doesn't have a website, is that something you can help them with? Or I guess I'm asking is like what's sort of your ideal client? Do you prefer like the starting from scratch or the redesign, or what do you like?
Well, I should say our ideal client is one that will engage deeply in the process with us, recognizes that their website is an integral part of their business, and will really put the time in to help us arrive at the answers that let us build the most effective thing for them. Because the more effective it is for them, the better it is for us. And we want to go on to the next client and say, hey, we worked with so-and-so for 3 months, and here's the process we went through, and here's the result, and here's how it aligns with their business goals. Many design shops have great portfolios, and the visual, of course, is very important. But a portfolio doesn't really tell you what problems a project solved or how the process went, what were the assumptions going into the project. So we like folks who really want to engage deeply in that. And it's not really a type of business or even a type of person. It's more, I think, folks that understand the importance of their site, the meaning it has for their business, and that, just like building anything else, they're investing substantial time and capital. They're taking a business risk by building this. And so we want them to basically take the process seriously.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned a few times here that you're all about the process, and I'm really curious about sort of your thinking as far as that. And so, like in the early days of your creating websites and building this agency and stuff like that, were there any sort of hiccups in figuring out what your process was?
All the time. So one of the key thing I would say is missing from website projects is planning. Planning, planning, planning. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. Most people don't look forward to slogging through planning and sitting in meetings. No one says, hey, yeah, that sounds great. People want to get to the fun part. They want to get to and here's what our logo can look like. And we're going to have this chat thing in the corner. We're going to use this platform. And that's all really nice. But people put the cart before the horse and they miss that. So years and years of doing this and hitting hitch after hitch in project brought me to the realization that without a solid plan, without a solid process, steps you're going to follow, you're just you're flying by the seat of your pants. And you can build a good website that way, but it's more frustrating, more time consuming, and it can lead to a lot more dissatisfaction with both the process and the end result. Because if you never really had to plan to begin with, when you get done, how do you even know that you succeeded? You don't have anything to measure it against. Well, the website's done. Well, a house can be done too, but if it's kind of leaning at an angle, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it's still a house you can live in, but look at it.
Yeah, that's huge, and I really like that sort of thinking. That like it seems tempting to jump in and just kind of play around and see where things happen, but that seems like a recipe for it working sometimes and not working other times, and not really being sure like what the magic was. And that was huge what you just said there. That like, well, if you don't have a plan, you don't even know if you got there because you don't know what sort of those requirements are. So I really like that sort of thinking there, as far as like, well, doing some planning up front sort of isn't the most sexiest thing, but it'll save you from having to do a lot of work later, or it'll save you from having to start over, and it'll save you from having that client not like what you create. So when you plan these sort of web projects, are there any sort of steps that you always go through, as far as like, figuring out like the information gathering and figuring out like the hours and the work and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so generally, there are some exceptions to this, but generally, the first thing to do is a needs assessment. It's also known as road mapping or pre-planning. Again, they're not sexy terms, but it is planning. And so we generally like to sit down with the client, or sometimes work over web conference and Skype. And it's basically just a very, very long list of questions to ask them. And usually each question brings up a tangent or another question that we want to dig into. And depending on the size of the company, the budget for the website, and the scope of the project, at least as we imagine it to be, this can take a needs assessment, and our writing a report can be it can be like an 8 or 10 hour thing where we do a strategy meeting or two and we write up something and bring it back, or it can be 40 or 50 hours of work for larger companies, larger scope projects. And it really seeks to identify who the company is, where they've been, where they're at now, and where they're going, and takes a look at things like their market, their customers, how they're perceived in the market, what are their competitors doing, you can also do, I've forgotten the acronym, but it's basically an assessment of risk. So something like risk and opportunity and threats and so forth. I'll remember it in 2 minutes.
Is it SWOT?
Yes, it is the SWOT analysis, made famous by the show Silicon Valley, perhaps. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Thank you. So even just I want to say if people don't have the time or budget to do all of this stuff, and sometimes it's just not there, doing a SWOT analysis on just, if it comes out to 500 or 1,000 words, just doing that for a couple of hours is so valuable, because you can immediately see, like, oh boy. So for example, if we do a quick look at competitors and see all their websites are terrible, that's an opportunity. You guys build a good website, get some traffic to it, you're heads and tails above the competition. If all the other competitor websites are darn good, well, then maybe that's a weakness, and you need to up your game, and you need to have a website at least as good as theirs, because otherwise, compared to what they're presenting as a face of their company, you're looking pretty bad. So just doing that, showing people where they're at in the market, is so valuable. But in the bigger picture, doing all these things, the competitive analysis, the looking at who the market is, and so on, is great. And one of the things that happens with these quite often actually is businesses will come in with certain assumptions. Let's take a construction supply company. So if you think of these guys, they're behind a counter all day, they're dealing with hard goods, they're having construction guys and gals coming in and pick up trucks. There's a lot of work over the phone, there's a lot of quoting, there's a lot of back and forth and camaraderie, and that's how a lot of folks engage with this business. They're coming in all day buying lumber, for example. The business owner may have heard from someone younger or millennial told him that, oh yeah, everyone's on Twitter, everyone's on Instagram, and now this guy has in his head that their business really needs to be on Twitter and really needs to be on Instagram, and that's how they're going to reach out to the younger generation. Well, you do a little analysis and you realize that the people buying construction supplies don't care about those mediums. It's just not relevant. So you can do all the stuff you want you can tweet all day long about, wonderful decking lumber. Nobody's listening. So to disabuse people of those notions and to show them that, hey, that's a nice idea, but you aren't selling iPod accessories. You're selling lumber to construction folks. This is not where they are. That saves them investing a lot of money in a platform that won't do them any good. And so to find that stuff out early before you build anything is really valuable, both to the agency, but of course to the client.
And I really like that a lot, that sort of way of thinking, because I know that early on I really resisted looking at competitors, and it was almost sort of painful just like seeing either like, all these other people who had like similar products or similar courses or websites or whatever. I always got discouraged up front because I thought, geez, like I'm going to have to work so hard just to get caught up, or I think, oh man, like that company, they had this really cool idea, and I thought of it too independently, but like they put it out there before I could. And as soon as I started looking, like sort of whatever you'd call it, like got toughened up a little bit and sort of looking at those competitors, then I was able to sort of make those connections, sort of like you were describing there. And I really like how you kind of you look at the competitors as far as like the strategy, and that way people aren't blindly kind of throwing in a tactic in there, like you said, like the Instagram thing, just because someone's using Instagram, and someone might think, well, that's something I'm going to tack onto my business. Well, if you don't think about like what the result's supposed to be or why you're even doing it, then like it just seems like a really easy way to get off track and to be doing all these things that don't make money but take up a lot of time. So I really like that whole idea of that SWOT analysis and looking at competitors and looking at a lot of them to see, well, is this thing you're looking to add, looking to spend time on, is it really going to do anything, or are you just kind of sort of following the masses because this little bug sort of got stuck in your head, so to speak. So that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing a lot from you is it seems like you really, like you said at the beginning, like you dive deep into their business and stuff like that. And it sounds like you really like take the time to like understand their business and to understand their industry. And so, I mean, was it always that way? And because the reason why I ask is because in your bio and stuff like that, you mentioned like sort of a computer programming background, and I'm sort of from like a similar kind of background, and I see a lot of like either people who have like knowledge or skills or like coders, they tend to like, I don't know, like kind of get stuck in that employee mode and don't really have that kind of confidence to maybe like be more of what they are, and to like make a real business and sort of get themselves out there and stuff like that. So I mean, did you struggle with sort of building the business side of things, or did that sort of come naturally to you?
No, I definitely struggled with it, and I think you're correct in it. If people have, I like to say, really broadly speaking, there's kind of two sides to the design and development world. There's kind of the art school side where people are really design savvy. Maybe they can draw and illustrate. They're masters of Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator, and they can make things really beautiful. Then there's the more technical programming side where people can make code do amazing things and save you a lot of time. Those are, of course, important skill sets, critical skill sets for building a website, but they're not the things that get you a great project. You need other skills, and those are skills I had to develop. I would say that the skill of sales, not in a smarmy used car salesperson kind of way, but in the collaborative approach of figuring out what someone needs and showing them how you can meet their needs and making sure that what you're offering is aligned with what they actually want and need. That's something I kind of had to learn on the fly. And this has shifted as the web and the requirements for the web have gotten arguably more and more technical, and there's more and more stuff to worry about, from social media to pay-per-click campaigns to all the multitude of devices we have to worry about. But the technical folks have also kept up with that and gotten really good. So I would say it's not particularly difficult to find people who can execute on good tech and good design. But what's harder is figuring out what that should be, what that should look like, and then building out projects that, going back to the initial idea, really meet those needs. So the liaison part, the collaboration part, is really important and needs to happen before you start throwing stuff at the technical people. In a previous incarnation, I worked at an insurance company. Lovely people, not a very exciting place to be, but I was basically a liaison between the IT department and the marketing and PR folks. So I would basically go back and forth and act as a translator, because often the IT people would start speaking tech speak, and I'd say, okay, and I'd make a bunch of notes. Then I would think about, okay, well, what does this mean for us in terms of what we want to build? What challenges will it present? What are we going to need to learn to do it? how long will it take, et cetera, et cetera. And I go back to the PR and marketing folks and say, okay, here's what this means. Then they would say, well, we want X, Y, and Z, and I'd go back to IT and translate it for them. So in a similar way, I mean, that actually prepared me for doing more of a collaborative sales marketing role with clients in that I do that same thing. I kind of take their needs and then ultimately translate them into something that our technical folks can build.
And that's an awesome way of looking at it because, again, as you're explaining that, it makes perfect sense because it's like those programmer types, they tend to get into all of that technical language. And it's like, well, who wants to hear that? If they're hiring you to do something, if they understood all that language and all those things, then they could do it. So it makes perfect sense that that there's like that sort of translation needed in that you don't need to fill in all the details, just kind of explain, why is this needed or how long will this take or how much will this sort of thing cost. That makes perfect sense to sort of stay out of the geek speak and stay out of that space cadet sort of jargon kind of territory, and think of it as, well, make those needs align, and they have certain requirements, and there's certain things I'm going to do, but I don't need to explain every little nook and cranny of what I'll do. What they're looking for is, will it work this way? Can I have this feature? Can I have it done in this length of time? All that kind of fun stuff. And so, as you're like explaining this sort of stuff, does your agency like have a certain sort of ideal client, or like what sort of project size and what kind of price range do you people prefer over there?
Well, we work across ranges. We'll work from the $5,000 and $6,000 and up. Those sites, I must say, I may be contradicting myself a bit here. Those sites tend more towards the, I don't want to say assembly line, but more towards a kind of templated, prepackaged thing where we kind of list out kind of here's a package and here's what you're going to get. And for a smaller business, like a restaurant or a small retailer or a small consulting company, that may be the appropriate thing for them. There's this tendency in the design world to always want to sell people, you're going to need this fancy branding package and this amazing website and all this stuff. Well, if they looked at the business's revenue, they would see that that's a huge percentage of their revenue this year, and it's not reasonable for them. But we do tend to shoot towards the larger companies, $15,000 up budget, usually, well, of course, because their needs are more complex. So if you have folks coming in, they're running events and seminars, and they have white papers, and they have downloads, and maybe they have a podcast, and all this stuff starts to accumulate, they need a custom solution. They need something that aligns to their needs, which are unique enough to their business that you can't really kind of apply a templated kind of process. You really need to go through the needs assessment process and writing a detailed proposal and really developing something for them that's going to meet their needs now and into the foreseeable future.
Cool. So 5 to 6K if they're looking for something sort of templated, and then 15K plus if they have all those sort of custom needs and the podcast and stuff like that. And so when they're doing these meetings with you and figuring out like the planning and how things are going, what sort of time commitment are we talking? Are we talking like 30 minutes a week, an hour a week, or does it depend based on how big the project is?
Yeah, the size of the project has a lot to do with it. We like to tell folks that, of course, they can't be completely hands-off, but if folks have truly minimal time, but more budget, they can hire us to do content strategy and copywriting. There's a whole lot we can take off their hands if they want that. But I would say typically, so on a smaller project, maybe in the 5 to 8,000 range, a client might be looking at spending. Oh, they should probably devote a day or so to initial planning. And then as the site goes, part of it has to do with how much feedback they give. Of course, everyone will say this, our favorite clients are the one where we show them a design or a layout and they say, yep, keep going. And there isn't a lot of change this, change that back and forth. But it is their project and they do have prerogative to make certain changes. But then I would say it's really hard to give a general number for that, but a lot of it comes down to the writing and sourcing the photography if folks are doing that themselves. And on the lower end of the cost scale, we're not typically writing for them. So, every page they have to write, they may need to devote 2 hours. So let's say their site is 12 pages, so that's 24 hours of writing, maybe some editing, throwing photography. It might be 40 hours right there. And then for a smaller project like that, 45 days is usually a good timeline. On the larger projects past 15K, it varies widely, but usually you're looking at least 75 to 90 days to go through the whole process. And I like to say if I had a dollar for every time a client said, "Oh, I didn't realize it was going to be this much work," I would have many dollars, um, because that's a very common refrain I hear from folks. Like, "Oh, not oh, this is so much work, I don't like it. Just I didn't anticipate it being this much." Because there are a lot of decisions to be made about copy and formatting and what type of photography to use, and even down to labeling of navigation items that really needs to be a collaborative process on these larger projects. And one of the pitfalls here is if you have an organization or a business with, say, 5 to 15 or 5 to 20 employees, typically it's just one person who's been saddled with this website project, and often a communications director or marketing director, and their other work doesn't stop during the process. So they can get bogged down in it, get overwhelmed by the amount of work they have to do. And I like to tell people at the outset, like, I'm trying to be straight with you. This is going to take a lot of your time. This is a big time and financial investment. You know, get some people in your organization, not just one, to really plan to contribute and set aside the time. And I don't want to be mean about it, but I want to say, look, this is a big deal for these larger projects. You guys need to account for this, because otherwise you get into it and someone's at 60 hours of work and they're not done, and they're just overwhelmed and overloaded. Of course, this can happen in many other scenarios, in many other businesses where you hire someone. They'll tell you what you don't want to hear, and you'll say, yeah, it's fine. And then you'll get in, and halfway through you realize, yep, they were right. And nothing you can really do about that. It's just human nature.
And it sounds like all good stuff to know going in, and it sounds like just what the common thread in all that is that just like the amount of time you think it's gonna take to make something is way less than what it'll actually take. Like there's always kinds of little details that always end up making something take double or triple the time that you estimate.
Yeah, that's really common. Another thing that can happen is if halfway through the project someone jumps in and says, "Hey, by the way, we've got this database XYZ system, and we really want to display some of its contents on the website, like our member directory or something." We say, "Okay," and we look at it. Sometimes it's an extra day's work, not a huge deal. Other times it takes a whole lot of planning and technical work and figuring out just how we're going to accomplish that. If someone brings that to our attention halfway through, thinking, "Oh, it's just a little thing," and it's not, that kind of thing can also delay a project and create work for folks on the other side. So I sometimes I think come across as someone who's really, like, "Oh, you got to watch out. Websites are a big deal," and that might turn people off. But I've done this so many times that I know that by telling them that and getting their acknowledgement, at least when we get to that point and things get kind of heavy for them work-wise, like they're still on board with us and they still get it, and they're really appreciative that we told them what to expect. Because everybody needs to eat. Everybody's going to take jobs that they know may not go as well as ideal. Um, but if we like to be straight with people and tell them what things are going to take, and honestly, that's sometimes cost us jobs, because people say, "Well, I found this firm XYZ, and they said this should only take 40 hours," and I just think, good luck. You know, I always come back to the home building analogy, because people kind of sort of understand how that works, and they can see. I guess in contrast to doing work on a computer, when someone is building things in your home or on your home or inside, you can see the work in progress. You can see the flooring going in. It's very easy to see what's happening. With a website, the technical people may go away, put their heads down for 2 whole weeks and not produce anything for you. And then at 2.5 weeks, something shows up on the website and it took 60 hours to do, and suddenly, it's here. But since people don't see the process, sometimes they miss the gravity of the work or the scope of the work. So I try to be straight with people about what to expect and hope that they appreciate that honesty going in, as opposed to having someone tell them what they want to hear and then getting into a project where they're down in the weeds after 3 weeks.
Yeah, those are some pretty good insights, and I imagine that anyone looking to hire you or hire someone to do something technical in general can really benefit from hearing like a little bit of those sort of behind the scenes kind of like hiccups and frustrations and places where sometimes things go wrong. Like you said, sometimes it's easy to kind of work something in, but other times like it's too late in the game to kind of fit that piece in. And that's a really good sort of takeaway there about how when someone's building something in the physical real world, you sort of see the pieces coming together. But when someone's doing all that computer stuff, like there might not be anything to show until weeks and weeks later. So good for people to know going in as they're about to go through this process. And so in your bio, we mentioned that you have a book. So can you tell us a little bit about that book in these last few minutes we have?
Sure. The book is called Website Planning for Small Business, and it was written kind of covering all we've discussed up to this point out of my frustration with just folks not having plans or our agency not having a plan for them to follow. And it's written in relatively non-technical language. It's not a book on how to code, how to use Photoshop. It's a strong outline of the entire process from that initial client meeting and sitting down with them and doing an initial strategy session or needs assessment, all the way through all the different steps, all the different parts, and also addresses who does what are the roles in the project. We also talk a lot about branding. This is something that is often overlooked, even by very successful businesses, as branding being the kind of overall look and feel of your business. The easy way to get people going on this is just to mention any business, say UPS, and immediately something pops into their mind. Oh, I think of the truck and the nice guy who comes and delivers my packages, or I see their ads, or I see the logo. So solidifying that with a business, if they don't have a strong brand or no brand at all, emphasizing the importance of building one, just taking people through the whole process. I wrote it in great part for business owners and decision makers to be able to have something to, it's not a physical book, but to have something to read, to grab onto, to say, oh, okay, I see how this works. I see why these things are important. And also I see what I need to do to help ensure that the agency that I hire or the individual I hire knows what they're doing and is going to get me a good result. Because so many times and for my colleagues, it's just the same. We've been on projects where there just really isn't a solid plan, and it just usually doesn't go that well. It just leads to a lot of frustration and cost overages and time overages, and you wouldn't undertake any other project that's costing thousands or tens of thousands of dollars without some sort of plan or blueprint, and you shouldn't do it for a website either.
Awesome. I love it. So where can people get that book?
So versastudio.com /book will get you there, and I believe I gave you a discount code. Yeah, that's right. So it's just Robert Plank.
Great
One
stuff.
word.
So versastudio.com /book and then Robert
Yes.
Plank, one word. And then if someone is looking for you to, on your team, to create a website or redesign a website or do whatever kind of service you need for them to do, where can they go for that?
So that's versastudio.com.
Great. And then once they go on Versa Studio, where's the best place for them to go to contact you?
There's a straight contact page where we just ask for a couple pieces of info, the portfolio and kind of the usual things. You'd asked at the beginning what makes us stand out. I finally put this in because it's a bit opinionated, but it's how we like to work. We have the usual pages you'll see on every site, portfolio and blog and all that. But we also have a page called Expectations. And that's where we talk about our expectations of a client and what they can expect from us. And so actually to re-answer your question or answer it again, the best clients we have are ones who would read that and say, yeah, I dig this. I can work this way. I want to work with these people. So that's where ideally, everybody reads that in a couple of your blog posts and your book before they contact you, so they become an informed client as just someone who's kind of, looking around.
And that's super cool. So everyone listening, make sure to go to versastudio.com and click on that expectations tab to see what Ben is talking about and see what he's all about and his values and his company's values and all those sorts of cool things. And then once you're ready to pull the trigger, then either go to versastudio.com/book to get that book, or if you want to contact him, click on that contact link on the top right, and that way you guys can get in touch and see if tell Ben about what sort of project you have and see what he and his team can do for you and see what can happen from there. So I want to thank you so much, Mr. Ben, for stopping by the show today and kind of sharing a little bit about the the trials and tribulations and the growing pains and stuff like that as that a lot of us face. And like you said, many times when we're outsourcing a project for whatever reason, if it's some kind of project in the real world, like someone's redoing your kitchen or building a house or something, we always think, well, of course we're going to have like a plan and we're going to, go back and forth on the requirements and translate my sort of English words into those technical like drawings and stuff. So it would make perfect sense in any sort of, project where you spend 10 grand, 20 grand on something to have the agreement in writing beforehand and have the planning beforehand and know beforehand like how long something's going to take and how much different items are going to cost. That makes a lot of sense in the real world, but for whatever reason, a lot of people sort of have a disconnect, and in this sort of internet computer world, they think, oh, I'll just hire someone, they'll push a magic button, it'll just instantly appear. Well, it makes a lot more sense to have that plan. That way, things are on track. That way, you get those predictable results. And that way you know that you've arrived at that destination that you're going to arrive to. So lots of really great insights and breakthroughs, and I appreciate hearing about your mindset and your process. And everyone should go to bursastudio.com. And thanks again, Mr. Ben, for stopping by and sharing some of that wisdom today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Robert.
Thanks for listening to today's program. Start from the beginning or view past episodes at robertplank.com/episodes.